Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is CJ, the Populist New Yorker, and today we're going to be taking a look at a 2022 best case scenario for the GOP on the gubernatorial level. I've done similar videos like this for the Senate. I've done it for either party's best case scenario for Republicans and Democrats. If you're interested in watching those videos, you can see them in the description down below. Anyway, let's get started here. I've already filled out the safe states for either party. These are states that the Republicans and Democrats will win by a safe margin of around 12 points or so. There's some safe states that are gray. It's just because I want to talk about them a bit more in depth. Doesn't mean they're necessarily going to go into the not go into the safe column. But we'll start off west to east as we usually do in these videos, and start off with the state of Oregon. Now, the state of Oregon is, like Washington, does actually have competitive statewide races. Pollsters don't really know how to gauge the Oregon gubernatorial race because some have it ranked as solid Democrat, some have it as lean, Savado's crystal ball has it as lean. And the reason why a lean margin makes sense, particularly in a Republican best case scenario, is because statewide, not federally, so not Senate, House, or for the presidency, but in terms of statewide elections, Oregon can get pretty competitive. Even in 2018, which was a blue wave year, arguably, Kate Brown's Republican opponent only lost by around 6 points or so in a state that is solidly blue, presidentially speaking. And, 2016, 2014 all yielded competitive gubernatorial results. I believe 2010 might have actually as well. Oregon is one of those states, like Washington, has very competitive statewide results. And I think Oregon, up until very recently, had a Republican treasurer for like a very long time. I know Washington State has a Republican Secretary of State. And they've had, or I think, a Secretary of State who was a Republican since the 1960s in Washington. So for some reason in the Northwest, there are still some Republicans hanging on to statewide office. I think a best case scenario, the Republicans run a fairly moderate candidate, obviously to the left of national Republicans. Probably a pro-choice type candidate, whatever, a more moderate candidate, and they'd probably bring it in with under 6 points. But I think even in a best case scenario in 2022, I don't think it's a seat that's going to flip. I mean, it's going to look pretty weird on the map because we're going to have other states that are arguably to the right of Oregon in the lean category, but it's because Oregon and Washington have this thing where in statewide races they're a lot more competitive than they are federally. Same with places like in New England, like Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. It's the same deal. They're a lot more competitive on the statewide level, particularly the governor's mansion, than they are in federal office. Next, we're going to take a look at the state of Nevada. In 2018, Steve Sisolak won this gubernatorial election by about 4 points or so, 4.1%, against Attorney General Adam Laxalt. It is one of those races that was to the right of the nation. Nevada voted to the right of the nation overall. I think, even though Dean Heller did lose, Nevada was more to the right, which I guess could indicate a broader trend of Nevada possibly becoming more Republican in the future. It seems to be trending that way. But certainly in a best case scenario, given how close Nevada is, I mean, if we look at the presidential results, Nevada was the only Clinton swing state that actually moved to the right. And I stress that a lot because it does fascinate me that, these states that were Bush 04 states, not all of them are now solid blue. Virginia's arguably solid blue, Colorado's solidly blue, New Mexico's likely blue, but basically always goes Democrat, federally speaking. Nevada is the exception. Nevada is actually very competitive. In 2020, Joe Biden only won this state by 2.4%. That's a very, very tiny margin less than Hillary Clinton won this state back in 2016. Places like Clark County trending more Republican, even a little bit, has large implications for the state statewide. So I think a best case scenario, Laxalt probably wins the governorship by a lean margin, anywhere from 2 to 6 points. I don't think it would be on the higher end. I think it'd be on the lower end just because it would be a pretty big, I wouldn't say a big upset, but it would certainly be an upset if Republicans were able to unseat Sisolak since he is an incumbent Democratic governor. Moving on to the state of Arizona. Arizona, I think in a best case scenario, probably would stay in Republican hands. Probably stay in the lean category though, because Arizona is going to be competitive this time around. The analysts all have it as toss up. I agree with that characterization. Doug Ducey, who won by a very commanding margin in 2018, despite Kyrsten Sinema winning her Senate seat by 2.4%, Democrat. That's nearly a 16-point swing on the same ballot, which goes to show you the electoral power Ducey once had. But since the 2020 election and since the COVID-19 pandemic, he's certainly fallen out of favor with a lot of voters in Arizona for a number of reasons. He's already ruled out running for the Senate in 2022. I think he definitely would have been the Republicans' strongest candidate electorally. He probably would have won. But since he is no longer running, Republicans would have to find a strong nominee who can turn out the rural base in Arizona and hold Maricopa County or win back Maricopa County, which in 2020 went blue both on the presidential level and on the Senate level. So I think the best Republicans would probably do is a lean margin, but I think Arizona, even in an off year where Republicans are favored, is going to be close. Colorado, I don't really think Republicans have a strong nominee in any situation. I think Jared Polis is a fairly popular governor. I don't really see him losing this race. I think the best Republicans would probably do in Colorado is a high lean margin, and I mean like 5 or 6 points. And that's if they run a really good campaign. I don't think Colorado has any chance really of flipping to the Republicans, especially with incumbent Jared Polis. Again, if we look how Colorado voted in the general election, it went over 13 points for Joe Biden, which is the bluest Colorado has been, I believe, since 1964. So really remarkable a feat that Joe Biden was able to accomplish in Colorado. And that was because he ran up the margins in the urban corridor of the state and the whole western part of the state as well. Areas that were once solidly Republican. You know, the ex-urban counties are no longer. Garfield County, I think, flipped for the first time in decades in a presidential election. So it really goes to show you that Colorado is a very blue state now. El Paso County, which Trump won by almost 20 points, he only won by 11 this time around, which is just goes to show you how blue the state of Colorado has gotten. Same thing, Douglas County, 11 points more Democratic, El Paso 12. And a midterm is a lower turnout election, usually, always, essentially. And Jared Polis is a fairly popular governor. I still think, even in the best case scenario, Republicans run a good candidate, I still think it's going to be a lean margin, and a higher end lean margin, 5 or 6 points. New Mexico, I actually think is going to be more of a likely margin. Now, New Mexico, I usually have as usually votes to the right of Colorado now as of 2020. We'll see, though, of course. But as of the 2020 election, New Mexico voted to the right of Colorado. I think for the first time since 1976, or it could be even longer than that. I don't know. I might be wrong. I think I'm wrong with that. But the state of New Mexico only voted for Joe Biden by 12 points, and that's still 11 points. And that's still an impressive margin, but Colorado is 13.4. So that's the first time we've seen Colorado vote to the left of New Mexico in a long time. Michelle Lujan Grisham is a very popular governor, or fairly popular. I wouldn't say, I don't know if she's very, I haven't checked her approval numbers. But being an incumbent in a state that's already blue and with no notable challenger, I don't think there's any big name Republican challengers against her. I think it should be pretty. Apparently Steve Pierce might run again, but again, if we just look at the 2018 midterm results, I know it was a blue wave year, but he didn't do too hot against her. So I think even in a best case scenario, Republicans are going to keep this state anywhere from 7 to 10 points is the margin I see. And I think obviously in my normal predictions, I have New Mexico as safe blue with Michelle Lujan Grisham. The state of Kansas, this might be surprising, but I actually think it could potentially be safe. And I know that's, again, this is unlikely because this is the Republicans' best case scenario prediction. But 2018, the stars aligned for Laura Kelly. She won by 5 points, but she won against Chris Kobach, who was very unpopular in the state. Not only that, there was a significant third-party factor, which probably helped her win her victory by as large as she did. There were plenty of Republicans, certainly in the suburbs of Wichita and Topeka and Kansas City, who couldn't bring themselves to vote for Laura Kelly, but also couldn't vote for Chris Kobach, and they voted for Greg Orman, the independent, who actually ran for Senate back in 2014. But I think it's very possible that we could see a Republican victory of around 12 to 14 points in a best case scenario. Again, Kansas is a very red state. If we look at the statewide results in Kansas, besides the governor's race, which went to the Democrat by 5 points, the attorney general race still solidly Republican. Secretary of State, likely Republican, but a 9-point victory, and treasurer, safe Republican. So the other statewide races are very, very red. And I think in this scenario, the Republicans would not only need a good nominee, but Laura Kelly would certainly need to slip in the polls. My normal prediction, I usually have Kansas as lean red just because I think she's not going to be able to overcome the factor that she is a Democrat in a safe red state. Again, America is a lot more partisan than it was in 2010 or even 2014. So I think waves are going to be a lot less dramatic than what we've seen in the past. And that's one of the reasons why I think Kansas probably, in a best case scenario, could go safe Republican, because in a similar situation like Doug Jones, and we'll pull his race up real quick, the stars kind of aligned for Doug Jones. He was against an awful nominee back in 2017, won by 2 points, and then as an incumbent senator, lost by a safe margin. Now, I don't think Laura Kelly is going to lose by 19 points, or sorry, 21 points, but I certainly think her losing by anywhere from 12 to 14 points in a best case scenario for Republicans is totally possible. But we'll have to wait and see. There's not really a whole lot of data on the Kansas governor's race yet, so we're going to have to wait and see on that one. In fact, I want to fact check that real quick to see if there's any hypothetical polling. And there only is for the Republican primary, not for the general. So, safe Republican in that regard. Texas, also safe Republican. I wanted to talk about that. Greg Abbott is running again. I think this could certainly happen in a situation where Beto O'Rourke perhaps is the nominee. I think something about Abbott that just goes to show you his electoral ability is, while his popularity has slipped considerably since 2018, and since even earlier this year, he was the only Republican in Texas to win by a safe margin in a blue year, in a year that Beto O'Rourke almost unseated incumbent Republican Senator Ted Cruz. He only lost by 2 points, which is remarkable given that it's the state of Texas. Texas, we, all used to think of as a safe Republican state. It certainly still is a Republican state. It's not a swing state. It's not a toss-up state. But it's a state where the margins are getting narrower. But I think in an off year like this, Greg Abbott having a larger percentage of Hispanic support really goes a long way in the state of Texas, which is a plurality Hispanic, I believe, at this point. I think he got 40% in the governor's race, which does explain the drastic margin. Even though he lost, did not as well as he did among white voters in the suburbs as he did in 2014. He still made that up with increased Latino support and, of course, really high margins in the rural areas. So I think against a poor nominee or Greg Abbott's approval rating improving, I think we could certainly see a safe red Texas in 2022 in a best case scenario for Republicans. Minnesota, we have the Democratic Governor Tim Walz. We'll pull up his race in 2022. He's a fairly popular governor. As far as I know, he's kind of like a Tim Wolf. He's not very controversial. At least he's not like a Gretchen Whitmer or like a boogeyman type Democratic governor. So I don't really think there's going to be a giant effort to oust him. The National Republican Party is going to be focusing more on races like Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. So I don't really think a lot of attention is going to be paid to the state. And also Tim Walz is a popular governor. I think the best Republicans can probably do is they'd probably lose the state by around 7 points. I still think it's probably going to be a likely margin, even in a best case scenario. Again, we can go back to the 2018 election results in Minnesota. Tim Walz won by 11 points. And there's nothing to indicate to me that he won't win by a similar margin next time around. It'd probably be a little bit closer because there'll be probably not the third party factor. And also, it will be a Republican midterm, but Minnesota has yet to flip any statewide races in a Republican midterm since the beginning of the century. So I think even in a best case scenario, this race is probably going to be likely. I don't really see this race getting very competitive. Iowa, we're going to put as safe. I just wanted to talk about it because at the moment, I believe Governor Kim Reynolds is not that popular. And the reason why I think she still has the chance to make this a safe race is because she still has effectively almost 2 years to make up her approval rating. And also, it really does depend on the Democratic nominee. But depending how dramatic the wave is, we could certainly see a safe red Iowa. But I just wanted to talk about that. Wisconsin, in a best case scenario, I think Republicans can probably unseat Tony Evers. Probably by around 3 points would be the ceiling, though, because again, in Rust Belt states, even in wave years, you don't really see dramatic results. Wisconsin, in particular, in 2018, there was not a dramatic shift to the Democrats like we'd seen in years past, like we saw in 2006. Michigan was a little bit of a different story, but Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are a lot closer than Michigan. But I think in a best case scenario, Republicans can certainly take back the governorship in Wisconsin. Again, this was one of the closest states in the 2020 election. Joe Biden won it by a smaller margin than Donald Trump won the state back in 2016. He only won it by 0.6. It could certainly, if Trump had done better in the WOW counties, he would have won Wisconsin, which would have been a very odd electoral map, having Wisconsin red and Michigan, PA, and Georgia, and Arizona being blue. It would have been very interesting, but I think it's certainly possible. Again, in the 2018 midterms, Scott Walker did pretty much better in the WOW counties, but where he underperformed in swing counties like Kenosha County, the Southeast, which is a swing region in Wisconsin, he underperformed. He did worse in rural areas than Donald Trump did in the 2016 election. So that was why he lost. He did better in the suburbs, but he didn't do good enough. And I think a good Republican nominee would be able to flip the seat. I think Michigan, in a best case scenario, would also flip, but I think it would be by a tilt margin. Michigan has only gone red once. Well, that was federally. But statewide, of course, Michigan did have a Republican governor in 2014 and 2010. The 2014 margin was a lot closer than 2010, but incumbent Republican Rick Schneider still did win by around 7 points, I think, or somewhere around there. It might have been like 5, but he still won by a lean margin. I think, I'm looking at the wrong map. Gretchen Whitmer did win by a pretty large margin last time. She won by around 9 points. It depends on the energy. It really depends on the candidate. It depends on Gretchen Whitmer's popularity. And it depends how dramatic of a wave we're seeing in 2022. I certainly think it's possible because, I mean, Michigan, again, we saw the Senate race of Gary Peters. John James was objectively a very good candidate. He wasn't good enough, I guess, because he didn't win the state. But he was a very strong candidate and outperformed Trump in the state of Michigan. And this was an election. Gary Peters in 2014, he won by a likely margin, I think, a likely or even a safe margin in 2014, which is a red wave year. I think Michigan is certainly going to get a lot more attention, and that's why I think it's a possible pickup. But again, some of the scenarios in this GOP best case are very unlikely. I'm just highlighting them as a best case scenario. Ohio's safe red in a best case scenario. Probably Mike DeWine would probably be the nominee. Now, he's actually not very popular among Republicans, but his popularity is pretty decent among Democrats, and one of the reasons for that is because of the lockdowns and Governor DeWine's strong response to COVID that kind of alienated sections of the GOP base, which could hurt him. Again, he could possibly lose a primary, although I wouldn't count on it, but there are people running against him. I think there's one notable challenger. We'll take a look at that actually real quick. Jim Renacci. Apparently in the 2 polls that have been released as of May, he is leading Mike DeWine. Mike DeWine might have trouble even winning a primary. But if he does, I think he will go on to win the state by a safe margin. They'll probably be around 5 or 6% going to a third party, but I think Mike DeWine will do very well in Franklin County and Cleveland. He'll probably do a bit worse in Northeast Ohio, but I think he'll do pretty well in the urban and suburban parts of the state for a Republican, and I think it would be safe. And I think, of course, even if there's another gubernatorial nominee, Jim Renacci, I don't know if he'd be able to make Ohio a safe state, but I think Mike DeWine certainly could. And again, he has a year and a half to fix his problem here. Well, about a year for the primary to fix his problem among the base, but it's very possible that he is able to do it. Maine, this is interesting because this is going to be an interesting state because we have former Governor Paul LePage running against current Governor Janet Mills. And in the only poll we have released on the race, he's down by 7 points, which is pretty interesting because he won both times, but he never won a majority. I mean, if we just look back, didn't want to do that. If we look back at the 2010 election, this was certainly a very messy election. We had 4 candidates running, 3 of them significant candidates. He won by around 2 points. He did so by, racking up margins here in the northern part of the state, the Republican portion of the state. In 2014, he won by around 5 points. He did a lot better than he did in 2010. And of course, in 2018, Janet Mills won by around 7 points. This is a state, again, I think it's very unlikely, but I think Paul LePage, in a best case scenario, could possibly pull up an upset. Again, he is a former governor, but it's very hard with ranked choice voting. And again, this is really a best case scenario, and I will, again, do the same thing with the Democrats. But I think it's a possible pickup. But I do stress this is probably the most unlikely call that I've made in this video, just because of I do think Janet Mills probably will hold on. And Paul LePage is a very Trumpian-type candidate. Although, in Maine, it worked in 2018 and 2014. Perhaps it works in 2020 with the right turnout. We'll have to wait and see. But I think it's possible for this upset. But I think it is, again, this is the most unlikely call in the video. The state of New York, I don't necessarily think is not going to be safe, but I did want to talk about it. This is my home state. And there is a contentious primary among Republicans between Representative Lee Zeldin and Andrew Giuliani, the son of Rudy Giuliani, in the Republican primary. The only poll we have has Giuliani leading. I certainly think Zeldin, has raised more money. I could be wrong about that, though. Well, of course, Andrew Giuliani has the endorsement of his father. Lee Zeldin has racked up a lot of endorsements from statewide candidates, not statewide candidates, county GOPs, local GOPs, and other big names, U.S. reps and state legislatures. And he's even got the endorsement of Mark Molinaro, who ran back in 2018, which, again, blue wave year. It is New York, so he did get crushed significantly. Lost by around 23 points. I think in the best case scenario for the GOP, it's a smaller safe margin, but I still think it's a safe margin. Lee Zeldin is definitely to the right of most of the state of New York. He does very well here in the first district, but he does not appeal broadly statewide. He's tied himself very close to Donald Trump. It works in some swing state, but in a safe blue state like New York, even with Cuomo being as unpopular as he is, and with a majority of people in polls saying they want another governor, I still think if it was Cuomo versus Zeldin, Cuomo would still win by a safe margin. Now, Zeldin could certainly get 41, even 42%, but that really is pushing it. I think the highest realistically he can get is 40%. But I think as of right now, this is going to be a safe Democratic race. Perhaps if we get closer to the election, I'll make another one of these videos and maybe things change, but I think this is still going to be a safe blue seat regardless. Pennsylvania, I think certainly could be a lean for the GOP. This is going to be an open seat. Tom Wolf is term limited. He can't run again. 2018, Tom Wolf won by a big margin, around 17 points. and he racked up votes in the populated counties. He even won Luzerne County, which is a county Trump won by a safe margin back in 2016. He also won Cumberland County. He won Dauphin County by 20. Berks County, which is Reading, by 7. Bucks by 18. Bucks County is one of those counties that's usually within, it's usually a lean Democratic county, but Tom Wolf did incredible in the suburbs, and he chipped away at the margins in rural areas. But he can't run, though. That's the thing. Tom Wolf is popular, and if he was running in 2022, I certainly think this would be a likely Democratic seat. But I think in a Republican best case, it's easily a pickup. I think it's easily a pickup. I think 2 to 3 points is probably the ceiling just because Pennsylvania is always close. But again, in order for candidates to win, Republicans to win in the state of Pennsylvania, they need to win Luzerne County. They have to win Erie County. Usually, they need to win Northampton, and they really need to shave down the margins in these lower collar counties around Philadelphia. Usually need to win Dauphin County or get close to it. If we take a look at the last time a Republican won the governorship in Pennsylvania, it was actually back in 2010 with Tom Corbett, and he won a landslide in PA. He won by around 10 points, and he basically won all but 4 counties in the state. Now, the state's politics are a lot different. The southwestern part of the state is a lot redder than it was back then, minus Allegheny. And of course, places like Center County and Dauphin County are a lot bluer. Same with Lehigh County and Chester County. A Republican would not win these counties in 2022. They could probably win Center and maybe Dauphin, but they would not be winning Chester or Lehigh. I mean, Lehigh is really stretching it because Lehigh County is usually a lean to likely Democratic county. Trump didn't even win it in 2016 when he carried the state. But I certainly think this could be a Republican pickup of around 2 to 3 points. I'm not really too familiar with the Pennsylvania gubernatorial nominees, but in this situation, Republicans probably run a strong candidate, Dems run a weak one, and perhaps Republicans even have the money advantage. Maryland, this might be shocking, but I actually think this could be a pickup for the Republicans too. Now, this sounds crazy if you're not familiar with Maryland's politics. If we go to 2018, Larry Hogan, the incumbent governor, won by a safe margin against Ben Jealous. He actually underperformed his polls, interestingly enough, because he was hurt by the blue wave, but not hurt enough to really affect him in the sense that he would lose. But in the 2022 Maryland gubernatorial election, though, his lieutenant governor is running for the seat. Boyd Rutherford is running for the seat, and I think he could certainly make it competitive. He's a very moderate Republican like Larry Hogan. He has name recognition. I think in a best-case scenario, Democrats, of course, pick a weak nominee, as they did back in 2014 when Hogan had his upset victory. And 2018, too, Ben Jealous was not a very strong candidate. I think in 2022, again, this wouldn't have much to do with the national environment because nationally, minus this race, Maryland is still going to be safe blue, all the other races. But the governor's races, there's a little bit of split ticking that goes into it now. And I'm sure Boyd Rutherford, if he wins the Republican nomination, will have Larry Hogan's full support. He might even campaign for him around the state, which will probably help him because Larry Hogan is still popular. He's faded in popularity, but he's still popular in the state of Maryland. Georgia, I actually think in a best-case scenario, Georgia is probably lean Republican. Now, that sounds low, but Georgia has gotten so blue in the past 4 years. Really, since 2016, it's actually remarkable. And it's thanks to the Atlanta suburbs. Again, if we go to the governor's race back in 2018, Brian Kemp was able to win by 1.4%. That's a tilt margin. He barely eked out a victory in the state of Georgia. If these counties around Atlanta were just a little bit bluer or were as blue as they were in 2016, he would have lost. This race wasn't originally competitive, but once Brian Kemp won the primary and Stacey Abrams proved to be a very strong campaigner and an excellent organizer, this state got really close. And I think even in a best case, Republicans are probably only going to win this state by 3 or 4. And I really think that's a stretch because I wouldn't be shocked if a state like Wisconsin or a state like Pennsylvania votes to the right of Georgia in 2022. Now, 2022 could be the Republicans' last hurrah in the state. I just think that the Atlanta metro is trending so dramatically to the left. I don't really think there's anything you could do to counteract that unless you were to chip away at those margins. But I think this is going to be a race that if Republicans do win, even in a best case, it's going to be fairly close. Florida, DeSantis, very popular in the state of Florida. He would probably win by a safe margin in a best case scenario. And that's more on the 12 end because Florida is still competitive, even if it's not a toss-up state necessarily. We could take a look at some polling to back this up, but DeSantis he's in a very strong position. He's beating all the polls, every single poll against his opponents. The only poll that he is not winning in is a St. Pete's poll. I've never heard of this polling agency at all. He polls a little bit worse against Charlie Crist, but I think if he's against Nikki Fried, this will be a safe margin. Nikki Fried getting crushed in most of the polls we have. Now, again, a lot of these are Republican internals. I think the actual result is going to be more of a likely or even a high lean margin. But I don't doubt that DeSantis will win re-election. But in a best-case scenario, he's probably against Nikki Fried. Democrats probably abandon her because it won't be that competitive. And the state ultimately goes to the Republicans by a safe margin. So anyway, guys, that is it for today's video. This is my Republican best-case scenario for the governorship elections in the midterms. Let me know what you thought of it. Again, some of these calls I wasn't 100% confident. Maine, I don't even know if in a best case Republicans can pick it up, but I think electorally, based on the fact that Maine is now more of a lean Democratic state, I do think it's possible. However, I think it's the most unlikely of these scenarios. But anyway, thank you all for watching. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon so you never miss another video. Share these videos with your friends. And as always, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.